Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the 411 Talk Song Radio Show. My name is Leon Jones, and tonight I'm going to get into a little bit of politics, but this video is going to be a teaching video. And I'm doing this because you hear the word tariff and quotas thrown around, and many Americans don't do any investing in the stock market. So they don't really know what tariffs are. They don't know what quotas are. They don't know what duties are. So what I'm going to present tonight is information on the political economics from international trade. Now, what you hear in the news is both sides talking about tariffs. Now, I will tell you this, I don't even believe a lot of politicians know what tariffs are because besides Donald Trump, the only other president that's really imposed tariffs, and I'm talking about modern presidents, and I'm going back to when I started to vote back in the 80s, and that president is Reagan. I know Nixon utilized tariffs, and I know JFK utilized tariffs. Now, a tariff is basically a tax on imported goods, but you can also charge a tariff on exported goods as well. A number of individuals didn't know that. Now, what's going on in the argument today is what are the tariffs going to do? So let's say if you're China and you're importing goods to America and you're in manufacturing and you do $100 worth of clothing, and then the United States imposes a 50% tariff on you. Well, what's going to happen is your price of your goods, let's say if you're going to sell your goods domestically, it might go up because the business has to pay the tariff. Now, a lot of these countries have been charging Americans tariffs for a long time. But the moment we start charging tariffs, hear other countries talk about, well, the American people are going to suffer, the American people this, the American people that. Well, these other countries, for the most part, aren't really capitalist countries. Many of them are dictatorships, they're socialist countries. But it's kind of funny, these countries don't mention their people. Why? It's because their people, they're not large consumers. You know, Americans, one of the problems with Americans, to make themselves look good, they love to buy a lot of bullshit. That's how Americans are. Americans have the economy that our boys in Canada depend on and Mexico. This is why Canada and Mexico didn't want tariffs charged to them. Now, I believe when it comes to trade, trade is good around the world. However, when one country is paying their fair share of tariffs and the other countries aren't, that's a problem. And see, with previous presidents such as Joe Biden and Barack Obama, they let other countries get away with anything. And this is why we have the problems today. And I always believe, you talking about your fair share, I hear the Democrats screaming, well, the rich ought to pay their fair share. The rich ought to pay their fair share. Now, if you look at it, because the tariffs have been charged, and the problem with the Democratic Party, they go against everything that America is doing. They hate America. What the Democratic Party really wants, they want a socialist country. They want to be like those other countries. This is why they go against everything that America does. I mean, the Democrats hated big business. And now, when tariffs are charged to those other countries, companies, organizations, and businesses, now all of a sudden they care about business. Makes no sense to me. So let me get into this PowerPoint, and I'm going to talk about the political economy of international trade. Now, when we talk about trade, we talk about free trade. It refers to a situation where a government does not attempt to restrict what its citizens can buy from another country or what they can sell to another country. While many nations are nominally committed to free trade, they tend to intervene in international trade to protect the interests of politically important groups. Now we have our instruments of trade policy. So, how do governments intervene in international trade? Well, there are seven main instruments of trade policy. One I've just talked about, tariffs. Then there are subsidies. Then there are import quotas, voluntary export restraints, local requirements, or we can say local content requirements, anti-dumping policies, and administrative policies. And in this PowerPoint, you're going to get a definition of these seven main instruments. And at the conclusion of this video, you should have some understanding of how trade works. Many Americans do not understand how trade works. They don't even understand how domestic economics works. So tonight, you're going to get a little lesson on international trade. First, I'm going to talk about a tariff. A tariff is a tax levied on imports that effectively raise the cost of imported products relative to domestic products. So, under tariffs, there are specified tariffs, and they're levied as a fixed charge for each unit of good imported. Now, let's say cars come in. Well, you hear the word tariff, but there is a fixed charge on a tariff. Let's say 10%. That's fixed. So you might have a BMW when they're imported from Germany. There's a 10% tariff. Well, that's the charge that BMW must pay the United States to import BMWs into this country. Then you have ad valorem tariffs, and they are levied as a portion of the value of the imported good. Well, the value. So we can have an imported good and there's a value. Well, it could be 10%. So if I have a clothing line for $100,000, I can charge 10%. So if the value is 100,000 and I charge 10%, 10% of $100,000, there you go right there. It's $10,000. That's what the charge is going to be. I'm levying a portion, not a percent. For the specific, you basically charge a fixed charge, which is a percent. For the ad valorem tariffs, you're charging a percentage of the value, which it is 10%, but it's going to be a nominal value. Again, I just gave you $100,000. You charge 10% tariff to $100,000, that's $10,000 for the tariff. As we continue tariffs, why do governments impose tariffs? To increase government revenues, to provide protection to domestic producers against foreign competitors by increasing the cost of imported foreign goods, and force customers to pay more for certain products, Tariffs are pro-producer and anti-consumer, and tariffs reduce the overall efficiency of the world economy. Now, you hear individuals saying, well, if a BMW shipped in and there's a tariff charged to that BMW, well, the BMW's it's going to cost a little more because of the tariff. Well, you can eliminate the tariff by buying something domestic. And this is exactly what the tariffs are doing. They're actually keeping domestic producers protected, just like I said, because there's a market for foreign cars. Now, another way companies can reduce tariffs, and that's based on the government, because even if you have a company here, well, your cars are still foreign cars. But now, if you build them here, you're just going to be charged a corporate tax rate because your company is here. Now, that's what Trump is trying to do with tariffs. He's using it as a negotiation tool. Now, you have some individuals over in Europe that they want to alleviate tariffs altogether. Bullshit. They're not going to do that. That's a pipe dream. The bottom line is, if you impose tariffs, it can also keep the domestic tax rate down. And what I'm doing, I'm trying to get you all to see what's going on in the market. Now, I'm giving you my research and my opinion. I'm not an expert on the market, but I'm utilizing common sense. Now, after tariffs, we have subsidies, and that is a government payment to a domestic producer. And subsidies are opposites of tariffs, because if you have a low producing foreign import, and here in the United States, your product is much higher than theirs, well, the subsidy helps domestic producers, and the help is to compete against low cost foreign imports. And you could also gain export markets. And basically, when it comes to subsidies, now see, tariffs, consumers don't absorb the tariffs, but subsidies, because it's domestic, consumers typically absorb the cost of all subsidies. And that is true. And we have import quotas and voluntary export restraints. Well, an import quota is a direct restriction on the quantity of some good that may be imported into a country. Then we have tariff rate quotas. They're a hybrid of a quota and a tariff, where a lower tariff is applied to imports within the quota than to those over the quota. Again, a tariff rate quota is a hybrid of a quota and a tariff, where a lower tariff is applied to imports within the quota than to those over the quota. And we have a voluntary export restraint. A voluntary export restraint. Again, that's a quota on trade imposed by the exporting country, typically at the request of the importing country's government. So we could want 1 million iPhones. Well, there's going to be a quota on how many iPhones we are requesting. And what happens is, the exporting country, like China, is going to have the voluntary export restraint imposed on them. And that's basically off of the request of the American government. And then you have a quota rent, is the extra profit that producers make when a supply is artificially limited by an import quota. Question: who benefits from import quotas and voluntary export restraints? Well, import quotas and voluntary export restraints benefit domestic producers by limiting import competition, but they raise the prices of imported goods for consumers. Remember that. When we deal with subsidies and we deal with voluntary export restraints, certainly we're protecting ourselves against the foreign competition, but we have to pay the costs. Local content requirements, and that demands that some specific fraction of a good be produced domestically. So this requirement can be in physical terms or in value terms. Local content requirements benefit domestic producers and jobs, but consumers face higher prices. Administrative policies are bureaucratic rules that are designed to make it difficult for imports to enter a country. These policies hurt consumers by denying access to possibly superior foreign products. Dumping is also an administrative policy. It's basically selling goods in a foreign market below their cost of production or selling goods in a foreign market at below their fair market value. So basically, dumping, it can be a way for firms to unload excess production in foreign markets. Now, some dumping may be predatory behavior to drive indigenous competitors out of the market and later raising prices and earning substantial profits. Then there's anti-dumping policies, and they're designed to punish foreign firms that engage in dumping. So the goal is to protect domestic partners from unfair foreign competition. U.S. firms believe a foreign firm is dumping and it can file a complaint within a government. And if the complaint has merit, anti-dumping duties, also known as countervailing duties, may be imposed. Now, here is the case for government intervention. And the question is, why do governments intervene in trade? Well, there are two types of arguments. Number one is the political argument, and it's protecting the interest of certain groups within a nation, only producers, often at the expense of other groups, who are normally your consumers. Then there are economic arguments, boosting the overall wealth of a nation to benefit of all, both producers and consumers. Now, here are the political arguments for intervention, and they include protecting jobs, protecting industries deemed important for national security, retaliating to unfair foreign competition, protecting consumers from dangerous products, furthering the goals of foreign policy, and protecting the human rights of individuals in exporting countries. Now, economic arguments for government intervention in international trade include infant industry argument and strategic trade policy. Now, the infant industry argument, an industry, here it is, an industry should be protected until it can develop and be viable and competitive internationally. This has been accepted as a justification for temporary trade restrictions under the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization. And critics argue it is useless unless it makes the industry more efficient. So basically, if a country has the potential to develop a viable competitive position, its firms should be capable of raising necessary funds. Now, the strategic trade policy. Well, there may be important first mover advantages. So governments can help firms from their countries attain these advantages. Governments can also help firms overcome barriers into industries where foreign firms have an initial advantage. Then there is a revised case for free trade. New trade theorists believe government intervention in international trade is justified, while classic trade theorists disagree. So basically, some new trade theorists believe that strategic trade theory is appealing in theory, but it may not be workable in practice. That's what we know of academics. But now you have two situations where restrictions on trade may be inappropriate: retaliation and domestic policies. Retaliation and war. Well, strategic trade policies aimed at establishing domestic firms in a dominant position in a global industry are beggar thy neighbor policies that boost national income at the expense of other countries. Basically, a country that attempts to use such policies will probably provoke retaliation. And a trade war, this is what you hear on the news, you're basically dealing with a trade war when it's basically negotiation of tariffs because all countries are going to charge tariffs. But when we have a trade war, it could leave both countries worse off. And governments can be influenced by special interests, particularly the American government. There are a lot of special interest groups, and they have a lot of influence in who gets in office, who's going to make money. And Washington, this is why we say politicians have been bought, which governments can be influenced by special interests. And most of the special interest individuals have the money. So if you don't have the money, the best thing for you to do is join one of these lobbyist groups. And these lobbyist groups are made up of former politicians, lawyers, doctors, just depends on what the issue is. And a government's decision to intervene in a market may appease a certain group, but not necessarily to support the interest of the country as a whole. And this is why we say government doesn't work. You hear the term oligarchy. Well, the people with the money have the most influence, where while the people who are the peasants, not the ruling class, their decisions are based on what the politicians say. But these politicians have been bought and paid for by special interest groups. We all know this. Now, developing the world trading system since World War II, an international trading framework has evolved to govern world trade. So, in its first 50 years, the framework was known as the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. It's known as GATT. Since 1995, the framework has been known as the World Trade Organization. Up until the Great Depression of the 1930s, most countries had some degree of protectionism. In 1930, the United States enacted the Smoot-Hawley Act, which created significant import tariffs on foreign goods. Other nations took similar steps, and as the Depression deepened, world trade fell even further. 1947 and 1979 GATT trade liberalization and economic growth. So basically, after World War II, the US and other nations realized the value of freer trade and established the GATT, which is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade in 1947. So the approach of GATT, which is a multi-unilateral agreement or a multilateral agreement, not unilateral. GATT is a multilateral agreement to liberalize trade. It was gradually used to eliminate barriers to trades. So GATT's membership grew from 19 to more than 120 nations. Tariff reduction was spread over 8 rounds of negotiation. GATT regulations were enforced by a mutual monitoring system, and this is between 1947, and 1979. From 1980 to 1993, protectionist trends. The world trading system came under strain during the 1980s and early 1990s because Japan's economic success strained what had been more equal trading patterns. So basically, persistent trade deficits by the US caused significant problems in some countries and political problems for the government. Many countries found that although GATT limited the use of tariffs, there were many other forms of intervention that had the same effect and did not technically violate GATT. Now we talk about the Uruguay round in the World Trade Organization. So the Uruguay round 1986 focused on services and intellectual property. So trade issues related to services and intellectual property and agriculture were emphasized. Then we had the World Trade Organization that was established as a more effective policeman of the global trade rules. So the WTO encompassed GATT and the General Agreement on Trade in Services, known as GATS, and the Agreement on Trade Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights, known as TRIPS. Now, the future of the WTO, unresolved issues, and the Doha round. So the WTO is currently focusing on anti-dumping policies, protectionism in agriculture, protecting intellectual property, market access for non-agricultural goods and services, in a new round of talks. That's Doha. Implications for managers. Question: why should international managers care about the political economy of free trade or about the relative merits of arguments for free trade and protectionism? Well, trade barriers impact firm strategy, and firms can play a role in promoting free trade or trade barriers. And when we talk about trade barriers in firm strategy, trade theory suggests why dispersing production activities globally can be beneficial. However, trade barriers may limit a firm's ability to do so. Why? Well, you raise the cost of exporting. You have quotas that limit exports. Firms may have to relocate, or firms not relocate, firms may have to locate. Again, firms may have to locate production activities within a country to meet local content regulations. The threat of future trade barriers can influence firm strategy, and all of these can raise costs above what they may have been in a world of free trade. And we have policy implications. International firms have an incentive to lobby for free trade and keep protectionist pressures from causing them to have to change strategies. So while there may be short-run benefits to having government protection in some situations, in the long run, these can backfire and other governments can retaliate, making it difficult to construct a globally dispersed protection system. Again, we're talking about tariffs, subsidies, dumping. When it comes to Americans and when it comes to other countries, see, other countries, particularly the EU and BRICS, which BRICS has had something to do with Britain, China is involved, India, and there are a few other countries. But those governments are a heck of a lot different than our governments. And I say right now, when it comes to the economy, China has been going outside the rules, the GATT and the WTO rules, for a long time. China does a lot of slave labor. So when they keep their labor costs down, they produce more. Here in America, our labor costs are a little higher. Now, when you get items made in China, although they produce a lot, it doesn't mean that they're any good. But they have a lock right now on national semiconductors, iPhones, and they aren't really importing our equipment. In fact, you have our companies that go over into other countries because they know that the labor is much lower. This is why you had a lot of the outsourcing in the 1990s. I mean, what this president is trying to do is bring manufacturing back because manufacturing was a moneymaker. And you had manufacturing from the Industrial Revolution up until the 1980s and the 1990s. The 1990s, the United States became a service industry. Now, with manufacturing, you're going to have to learn a little more because we have a lot of automation. But I'm going to say this when it comes to a car, again, if there's a car that's going to come in and let's say you include the tariff and the price goes up, I don't have to buy that car. You know, free market means you have a choice. You have to create competition because if you don't create competition, you're going to have a number of monopolies. And let me give you an example. You look at the cable TV market. One of the biggest cable TV markets right now is Xfinity. And Xfinity has grown because it's bought up a lot of their competition. And see, this is what the Democrats don't want. They want socialism. Now, they will tell you they want capitalism. They want very few options. Because when you have no competition out here, let's talk about the grocery store industry, like your Albertsons, who owns Kroger and Acme. Well, they can decide what they want to charge. I know Kamala Harris was talking about price gouging, like the government is going to go and tell a business what to charge. Well, that business might be donating to her campaign. See, she didn't think about that. But in the midst of everything, a number of Americans, they get caught up in what they hear on the media and public opinion. They don't know anything about the economy. And the reason why Americans don't know anything about the economy is because many Americans are consumers. We buy a ton of bullshit, stuff that we don't even need. And the clothes, who buys the most clothes in this country? Women do. And they buy everything that's trending. A few years down the road, the clothes that they bought maybe a few years ago, they're going to the Goodwill. But they spent their money on. And we buy a lot of items as consumers, because you look at China, Jordans. What China does is, okay, we can produce an item. China can go steal a design and make a knockoff brand and sell it for less. That's how they're making money. They're stealing different brands. And because they can mass produce it much faster than Americans, because one of the reasons why the steel mills shut down here in America, now there are a few open. I live here in Indiana. Up in Gary, they have some steel they're still making because they didn't automate. I know you hear a number of individuals talking about the unions. That was part of it as well. I know my dad worked for Bethlehem Steel at the Sparrows Point plant in Baltimore, or at Sparrows Point. At Bethlehem Steel in Gary. My mom lived in Midland, Pennsylvania. There was a mill there. You had a lot of mills all over the Rust Belt, which is here in the Midwest. They closed down because they had to compete with China. Americans wanted to buy steel cheaper. Well, either we weren't producing it fast enough, or the steel that we were producing, we had to pay a lot of money for. So America decided, well, we can import it. Now, does it make Chinese steel a lot better than American steel? No, it doesn't. But in the end, when it comes to the market, you have to understand when you're dealing with tariffs and taxes, what President Trump is trying to do. You may disagree with it, but too many Americans are impatient. They expect everything to happen now. Now, I can tell you here in Indiana, I go out every day and gas prices are steadily going down. Some areas they're below $3. We're just above $3 at some gas stations. You're going to see the effects based on what's going on with the trade and the negotiations. Now, President Trump decided to postpone for 90 days tariffs. So they're negotiating. And what he wants is for the other countries to play by the rules. Other countries without America, some of these smaller countries like Uruguay and the Bahamas, they wouldn't exist without trading with Americans. Now, of course, China, they mass produce a lot of goods. But how many brands do they have represent something that is quality? And so you have to realize when you go over to different countries, they may not have the same standards when it comes to producing goods as America. We tend to have better quality control over here. We don't have sweatshops over here. Whereas in China, they have more of the sweatshops. So when goods are produced, who's inspecting the goods? Let's say a medicine comes out. Who's approving the medicine over in China? We don't know. Here, everything is approved by the FDA. You do need some government, but you need the right people in government. But we can't have bureaucracy decide how we want to live either. I know the Democrats, they really want to get a lot of government involvement, but government is supposed to protect our rights. Now, we can have government intervene to allow competition. And in a capitalist society, you have to allow competition. Competition is good. Now, again, some people don't understand the capitalistic system, particularly the ones who are sitting on their ass collecting a government check, even when they're able-bodied. And hopefully, able-bodied individuals can get off their ass. There was one person up here, Jay Prince is his name. He's bragging about being on welfare. You had another guy, Beans. Now, I'm not in that sector, and I'm not trying to call them out by saying that they're bad people. But I will tell you, they're bragging about getting food stamps. Now, I don't care how you want to live. I don't want to live like that. Bottom line, in this country, you have to work hard. You have to understand how it works. Now, I'm going to do a video next week on investing because many of us here in America, we don't understand how the market works. We don't know what yields are. We don't know what the Dow Jones Industrial. We hear the name. We don't know what S&P is. We don't know what preferred stocks are. We don't know what common stocks are. Treasury stocks. Treasury stock is when the company buys back the stock and then they'll go and resell it. That's an example. You have a preferred stock, common stock. I believe your preferred stock is your stock that goes up and down, your 401ks. That's basically what many of us are utilizing. And the reason why 401ks are popular is because there's no pension system. Many individuals aren't working 30 years like the baby boomers did, and they took all the pensions, the older baby boomers. during the 60s and 70s, they collected it all for themselves. So the late baby boomers, the Gen Xers and millennials, we have to work a little longer. But in the end, you have to understand that the American public is not an investment type of society. It's not. Americans are very delusional. They're influenced by the media. You can lie to them. They believe anything. They're about feeling good today. They don't look at tomorrow. Not today's Americans. The court of public opinion tells them what's right. They don't investigate. And this is why they have a lot of issues. And in the end, many of them, they'll get a certain age and they wonder why they're still poor because they don't save money. They think the way to success is based on how much you buy. And a lot of Americans live above their means. That's why they're broke too. So that word rich, I don't use the word rich. You got to stay in your lane. Not everybody's going to be able to afford $1 million house. Not everybody's going to be able to afford a Tesla or a Lamborghini. Some people might have to just stay with a Malibu. But it does the same thing that a BMW does. And I know Angry Man brought this up. And I don't blame him for saying this either. And I agree with him. If he worked hard to make his money and he wanted to buy a BMW, and then you had another person who was less educated, didn't know anything about money, was also buying a BMW, that to me, that does sound a little disrespectful. And this is why you get some people, even though they don't need it, they'll go buy items that other people can't afford because they want to be the only ones who have that item. That's why they're buying it. Do they need it? No. But they're showcasing. And they know no one else, like a yacht. Many of us can't afford a yacht. This is why yacht manufacturers, they market to certain people. And one thing you must understand here in America, it's different markets. Markets are filled with tangible and intangible goods. And you have to pay a cost. And sometimes when there are changes made in policies, you're going to feel some pain. What do you think those individuals felt back in 1929, just before World War II, the Great Depression? They felt pain. And the people who really felt most of the pain are the individuals who live in the cities. If you live in a country and you're more self-sufficient, you're not going to feel it as much because you're not dependent on the grocery store. You're not dependent on the government. You're dependent on nature, but you have to know how to deal with nature. But when it comes to understanding the market, understanding the capitalist system, it's competition. Most people don't want the competition. That's why they want government. They want, it won't surprise me if in the future we have UBI, Universal Basic Income. See, too many Americans are focused on being equal instead of focused on making money. They talk about, they really envy the individuals who make a lot of money because they think they're greedy. Now, there is some greed. Some people have screwed others to get to the top. Some people have slept their way to the top. But the bottom line is this: when you're not knowledgeable, when you're not knowledgeable about the market, and when you're just a consumer, you're always going to be on the bottom. This is why when I hear some of these shows out there, get some of these women talking about six figures, many of them, let's say they gross six figures, but after all their bad buying habits, they're broke. Why? Because they don't know how to manage money. Many of them don't write down what they spend. Many of them believe that, and this is women all across the board. Women are the biggest consumers. That's why it's good to have them in the workforce. Women will buy a bag of shit with gold in it if you sell it to them, a number of them, because they don't know what's going on in the market. And this is what America is producing: a lot of dummies, no common sense. We'd rather be hinged on race, gender, sexual orientation than money management. Instead of understanding how the world works. And here in America, we're lying to people to make them feel good. We're telling even the most dysfunctional people they're the same as functional people. That's a crock of bullshit. But you have the dysfunctional person believing that. See, feeling good is not always good. It's the same as just because something is free, it's not always good. And this is the problem with America. You see on CNN, the mainstream media, they like to get people on the show who lie. You look at The View. Whoopi Goldberg has been suspended. Lies and deception. And it won't surprise me if that show is canceled, because some of the major players are quitting. Because The View dug a hole for themselves. The View is owned by ABC, and who owns ABC? Disney. It's a big company. And guess what? You have a lot of investors who are involved in Disney. So when The View started spewing their bullshit about Donald Trump this, the market this, without any facts, you had advertisers. Yes, advertisers pull away. They don't want to invest in that because they know that sooner or later The View is going to tank. And then you have 60 Minutes. You know, they're being sued. And you have people like Elon Musk, Donald Trump. They're going to sue 60 Minutes. Defamation of character. And when it comes to politics in this country, the Democrats especially, they're childlike. They have no real argument. They're really against this country because they want a socialist country. They're so hell-bent on everything being equal, you can't grow. But I don't understand why a number of these Democrats won't take a trip over there to another country to see how it works. These people are very stupid. But a number of Americans are stupid as well. Ignorant. And that's why there's a CNN and MSNBC still on the air. Because a lot of what I hear from some of your normal people out there, they're regurgitating what they hear on mainstream media. Now, is Fox great? No, Fox isn't great. Now, do they have some individuals who are knowledgeable about business? Now, I will say this about CNN. Kevin O'Leary, he knows what's going on with the business. When you talk to somebody about business, he's a juggernaut. Scott Jennings. That's the only reason to watch CNN. And then you have these blabbermouth women on there and sweet ass men, regardless of race, who are in their feelings. And they're in their feelings and they want to shut everybody down because they don't know anything. And it makes them feel good to try to shut individuals who are above them in knowledge about the market, about how the world works. And you have people like Kendra G. She has individuals on her show that they talk about being entrepreneurs. Many of them are self-employed. They're probably working on OnlyFans, and they lie about the money they're making because they're delusional. Arrested development. They're children. That's what Americans are. Americans are like sheep. You know, feminism. Women talk about they don't want a man leading. But when they get bullshit from other women and they listen to it, yeah, they might not want a man leading, but their boss, he's a man. Women are followers, except when it comes to their own home. But they're also a hypocrite, number of women. They're the easiest ones to pitch something to because they are consumers. That's really the only thing feminism is, well, because feminism has destroyed everything else, but it's allowed women to work and become consumers and taxpayers. A lot of women think, oh, I'll make my own money, I'm empowered. No, you're just spending it on a business. You have very few women who are investing in any types of stocks because they don't know anything about stocks. They don't know anything about tariffs. Everything that you hear on a number of these shows, and you have a number of women on these shows, they're regurgitating from somebody like a Jasmine Crockett. She doesn't know anything about the economy. I don't care if she's a lawyer or not. She doesn't know anything about the economy. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she knows nothing, and she has a degree in economics, but knows nothing about how it works. But again, you have the dumb people of New York who vote for her. And this is why I call America the dream. No, America's a scheme for most people. That's why most people can't make it here or don't like this country. You don't need to go to college to educate yourself on how the country works. You just need to experience common sense. If you spend more than you make, you're always going to be broke. Everybody is not going to be on the same level, regardless of what your race, your gender, or your sexual orientation, or religion. What the Democrats want, they don't want equality, they want equity. That'll never happen. It's a dream. That's why they hate America. But they benefit from America. And in the end, I'm just going to say this as I wrap up. When you understand what's going on around you, you have an easier time navigating yourself through complex problems. When you are ignorant, you don't have an idea how something works, you're going to make excuses up, especially when somebody gives you the formula on how to help yourself. And in this country, I'm just going to say this, and it's always been truthful. A lot of people don't want to say it because they don't want to offend anybody. I'm going to offend some people in the United States of America. If you're constantly being ignorant, you're on the losing side, and you will quit, and you will be weak. If you're utilizing common sense, critical thinking, and you understand how the market works, you'll be successful. And it doesn't matter where you come from. So the bottom line is this: here in America, do you want to win and succeed? Or do you want to lose and be a victim? The choice is yours. And that's my commentary for this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're looking for some STEM content, check out my second channel, the QCIS channel. On that channel, I give you a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, here's where you can find me. You're on the 411 Talk Zone radio show, which is my main channel. You can find me on YouTube. This video will also be posted on Rumble. Also, find me on X, formerly Twitter, and Truth Social. Now, for the QCIS channel, you can find me. You're on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, and LinkedIn. And generally, for the QCIS channel, I do my videos between Thursday and Saturday. So overall, when it comes to the market, understanding how it works, everybody's not going to be on the same level, but you need to hear this. Always be blessed for what you have. Don't worry about what you don't have. Know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And if it doesn't apply, let it fly. But if the shoe fits, wear it. If you don't like the shoe, change it. And that's for the individuals who get offended about the truth. And once again, thank you for listening to this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. Till next time, my name is Leon Jones. I want you all to have a wonderful and gracious evening. God bless you. I'm out.